再開させていただきます。本部ではですね、会社のプルトニウム処分における国際状況と題しまして、世界のですね、最初の緊急状況に関してですね、議論をいただきたいと思います。まず最初にですね、韓国原子力研究所のファイナンスさんに、ご講演いただきまして、その後、パネルディスカッションの方に移らさせていただきます。
皆様、こんにちは。このセッションのコーディネートをさせていただきます、グリーンアクションのリンドスミスです。よろしくお願いします。本日はですね、これから5名のスピーカーの方からご発言いただくんですけれども、非常に知識と経験が豊富な方々です。でぜひ今のレベル状況ですね、最初にレベル4の処分をめぐる国際状況について分析していただき、そして、これから何をしていけばいいのかということも具体的なご経験をいただければというふうに思います。で、この問題について大きくこのセッションで踏み込んでいただければというふうに思います。で、午前中のセッションでもコーディネーターのストーミナさんからも発言ありましたけれども、やはり日韓の市民多く参加していますので、その具体的にその市民がどのように関われるかという手がかりについても、そのスピーカーのご発言を通してポイントを押さえられていければというふうに思います。で、ちょっとこのセッションの説明をしますと、3時45分にコーヒーブレイクがありますけれども、ぜひ質疑をですね、そのコーヒーブレイクのセッションの一部後半で始めたいと思いますので、皆様トイレ来て、それからコーヒーを受け取ってからお戻りになりまして、そして質疑をですね4時から始めたいと思いますので、その点よろしくお願いします。では初めのスピーカー、冒頭の報告ということでよろしくお願いします。韓国原子力研究所頼りの専門家ですね。
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Juan from South Korea. Today, I'd like to present the global trend for the reprocessing, focusing the use of the MOOCs, and then I'd like to move on to the South Korean specific programs. I'm sure that many of you are interested in what's going on in South Korea for the nuclear power plant industry and all the research about the reprocessing. So I'll try to summarize today. I think it's kind of not good time to have a presentation after the good lunch. I think that we have to sleep somehow, but I'll try to do my best to wake you up for my presentation. So as you know, even though there are many countries who would like to go for the direct disposal, there are certain countries who would like to work on the reprocessing. France is the one of the examples. Their newly formed Urano is still pursuing the traditional Purex reprocessing business, even though there is a decrease in demand for the overseas reprocessing business. Also, Russian Federation is working very hard to develop their fast reactor in combination with various reprocessing technologies. And India is doing a lot of research program at this moment. And of course, Japanese will try hard to open somehow the Okashimura power reprocessing project pretty soon. And South Korea is one of the unique countries in the world because we have a lot of reactors in Korea, and we could not solve any problem about spent fuel management. Especially when Mr. Moon Jae-in became our national president, he proclaimed the new energy policy, named as the Energy Transition Plan. So the core concept of the Energy Transition Plan is something like that, something like this. First of all, South Korea will not introduce any more new nuclear power plants. Also, South Korea will not extend the lifetime of the existing nuclear power plant. So, in Korea, we have three different kinds of reactors. One is the Canadian CANDU reactors. The other one is the traditional pressurized water reactor. The final one is the so-called advanced reactor that we exported to UAE. So we call AP1400. Traditional PWRs and CANDU reactor have the lifetime of 4 years. And the newly built AP1400 has a lifetime of 60 years. So after their lifetime, the government will shut down the operation and will try to decommission the reactors. And currently, we have only one APR 1400 in operation, New Unit 3. All other 5 APR 1400s are under construction. So I expect the final reactor in South Korea, the New Unit 6, will be in operation at around 2026 or 7 or 8, something like that. There might be some kind of delay during the construction. So it will operate up to 60 years. So at around 2087, something like that, there will be no nuclear power plant in Korea according to our new government. So it's stipulated by our National Electricity Supply Plan, which was proclaimed last year. So that we will terminate the operation of the old existing power plant gradually. But still there is a problem for the spent fuel management in South Korea. South Korea was good to construct a nuclear power plant, but we are not so good to manage the spent nuclear fuel. So that's our problem. We have been criticized by general public about the proper management of spent nuclear fuel. So unlike United States and Japan, we, at this moment, we do not have any dry storage installation for pressurized reactors at all. So all the spent nuclear fuel from pressurized reactors are stored in wet pools at reactor site. However, as I already mentioned, we have another power plant in Korea. CANDU reactors. CANDU reactors produce a huge amount of spent fuel. So we are out of the storage place for the CANDU reactors located in Gyeongju area. So we have a lot of problem to properly manage the spent nuclear fuel. So the government try to have a dialogue with the public and the stakeholders. So I saw as the first public and stakeholder engagement meeting in between 2005 and 2007. And the previous government opened another round of the public and stakeholder engagement named PECOS between 2013 and 2015. And they gave us some recommendations. Those recommendations never materialized at all. After the government changing, it's in the new government would like to have a new public and stakeholder engagement. So this year, our new government tried to have so-called pre-public and stakeholder engagement, PSA, very hard. So they finally complete the preliminary PSA just 1 week ago, but they could not get any resolution at all. So they could not agree with anything, simply because there are so many different stakeholders. Especially, we have a difficulty have to define local community. What's the definition of local community is very important for the public and stakeholders. Does that mean the local community within 5 kilometers distance from the power meter? Does this mean the local community within the 30 kilometers radius of the power plant? That creates a lot of problem. So we do not have a finite conclusion at all. Also, as I mentioned, we have some very significant problem for the Canadian reactors. So we definitely should introduce the dry storage facility as early as possible. But we could not get the agreement. So our government, as far as I understand, will make some decision so that we can restart the new round, the main round somehow from the beginning of next year. I'm currently working as a project manager to write down all the technical details of the options for the spent fuel management. And I'm about to publish my report at the end of this year. So we have a lot of detailed issues to manage the spent fuels. And also, we have a big change on the spent fuel horizon. The previous government would like to promote the nuclear energy as much as possible. So we expect that the total amount of spent fuel from the operation of nuclear power plant in South Korea was around the level of 80,000 metric tons. But as I already mentioned to you, our new government would like to introduce the so-called new energy transition plan, so that they decrease the total amount of spending fuel very significantly. So I expect that the total amount of spent fuel in South Korea will be less than 40,000 metric tons. Among 40,000 metric tons, around 13,000 metric tons would come from Canadian reactors, and the rest will come from the pressurized reactors. Unlike Japan, we do not have any boiling water reactors in Korea. We only have pressurized reactors in Korea. So, based on all the technical details, we'll try to restart the main round of the public and stakeholder engagement in 2019. So there might be a very important factor for our consideration. So we have two entities in our government working on the nuclear energy. The first one is so-called MOTI. MOTI is equivalent to your Japanese NETI. It's an implementation body. So Korean MOTI has the power to introduce all the commercial facilities in Korea. And like your next, we have NSIP, which controls all the research programs. And I came from Kerry. Kerry is the National Laboratory for Nuclear Energy, so we belong to NSIP. So we are responsible for the technology development, and the NETI is responsible for all the spent fuel management for the real implementation. So at this moment, as I already mentioned to you, we have a lot of problems for the Canadian reactors. Canadian reactors produce around 100 metric tons of spent nuclear fuel for each year, while the traditional PWR reactors produce just around 20 metric tons. So Canadian reactor produces 5 times more spent nuclear fuel. So we have a lot of problems to properly manage the spent fuel from the Canadian reactors. Our policy is very simple for the Canadian reactors. Just have a dry storage and then send it to the final repository. Period. But we have a lot of problem to persuade the local community to introduce new dry storage facility for Canadian reactors. So at this moment, if we cannot construct the new storage facility by the end of 2020, then we will have a real problem to operate the nuclear power plant for the Canadian reactors. So that's our biggest concern at this moment. So our government would like to introduce the newly built storage facility as early as possible for the Canadian reactors. And also for the PWRs, first of all, we'd like to introduce the at reactor site dry cask pretty soon. Then our government would like to introduce some kind of nationwide centralized storage at around 10 years or almost 15 years from today. And then our government would like to introduce the final repository in the middle of this century. That's the implementation plan. So in our implementation plan, probably South Korea would like to go for the direct disposal. But for the scientific reasons, we'd like to find out whether there is a good alternative way against final direct disposal. So we are doing some kind of fundamental research for that mission. So I'd like to summarize the ongoing fundamental research inside Korea. It might be the interest of many participants. So we are covering all the spectrum of the spent fuel management in South Korea. The transportation is the number one. How to transport spent fuel from one place to another is the big issue. Not just for the technology, but for the public sector. Usually, the local community and anybody in Korea might be against the transportation nearby their house, in houses. So we have to solve the transportation problem. So my organization is working hard to find a better way to transport all the spent fuel. Also, as I already mentioned, we have to introduce the storage of the spent fuel facilities. So whether we shut down the reactor or not is not a big matter. We already have a lot of spent fuel. So it's our responsibility of our current generation. So since we enjoy the very stable and cheap supply of electricity from the nuclear power plant, we should try to solve the problem for the spent fuel management. And the first step would be storage options. So we will work very hard to persuade the local community so that they accept the dry storage installation. So in Japan, for example, in Fukushima Daiichi nuclear complex, you already have some dry storage installation. But we do not have that kind of installation at all in Korea. So our public is more against the storage and disposal in South Korea. And also, we have started the direct disposal of the spent fuel. Unlike Japan, our first study for the disposal was direct disposal of the spent fuel into deep geological formation. So we have studied that option since 1997, and we developed the Korean-style disposal concept in 2006, named as the KRS options, Korean Reference System options. It's similar to Swedish option. Swedish SKB developed a good concept for the direct disposal of spent fuel. And we completed that mission around 13 years ago, and we published all the reports. And then we got a mission from the government that we should develop the final disposal of the high-level waste, probably from the pilot process. So that was our second mission. So in South Korea, after we studied the direct disposal option, our government recommended us to study on some kind of reprocessing technology named pyro processing. So it's a very complicated pyroprocessing technology. It's advanced processing technology, somebody called advanced recycling technology. So it's the combination of the pyroprocessing plus the test reactor. So we have studied that option for around 10 years, and our colleagues in Korea developed the concept for the disposal of that kind of waste just around 3 years ago. So we published that one. But after the new government, the government recommended to re-evaluate the value of the pyroprocessing. So from the last year, we have had a series of discussions about the future of our so-called advanced reprocessing technology. So from the beginning of last December to the middle of this May, we had very serious discussion about the future of the reprocessing technology study in South Korea. And somehow our government decided to support some research, for very fundamental research for the next 3 years. So this year, 2019 and 2020, we will study some fundamental area of the pyroprocessing. Pyroprocessing, as I already mentioned to you, is a very complicated technology. The first part of pyroprocessing is nothing to do with sodium phosphate business. Let's focus on the pro-environmental technology for the final disposal. So our government kindly recommended us to focus on that kind of research. So if you know something about the safety of the deep geological disposal, there are some specific radionuclide which gives the big harm against human beings. So we try to focus on our research on the current pyroprocessing to match some specific radionuclide. And still, but the other part of Kerry is still working on development of the sodium phosphate agents at this moment. So it's very complicated. But we will finish all the work by the end of 2020. And also, we will finish the 10-year-old joint research program with the US Idaho National Laboratory by the middle of 2021. So probably our new government and the national diet will try to gather the whole information from our domestic study and the joint research in the United States. And we will try to make a final conclusion at that time. So probably they will start our pyroprocessing research at that time, or they will extend the pyroprocessing research even after 2020. So we do not know. So I'd like to summarize my presentation very briefly. So in summary, as I already mentioned to you, the role of the nuclear energy in South Korea is limited. So we will not build any more new power plants. It might be changed, but current government strongly supports the transition between the renewable energy and the nuclear energy very strongly. So we will follow the direction of the government. Also, that results in less spent fuel horizon. So we will be probably be comfortable to introduce the disposal technology because we will have less spent fuel. So the order to manage the less spent fuel is good for us. Still, we should get a strong support for the final future of the spent fuel in Korea. Without any public support, we cannot go anywhere. So we'd like to have a good active dialogue with the public and the stakeholders so that we can draw some final conclusion for the future of the spending per year. Anyhow, we desperately need the introduction of the dry storage installation. So we have to work on that one. So, as I already mentioned to you, we have a very strong national implementation policy, so which will make a final decision for the future of the nuclear energy. But in parallel, we are also doing a fundamental research covering storage, disposal, and all the chemical separations together. And based upon those research outcomes, probably we will select the best solution for the final management of spending field in South Korea. Thank you very much.
Speak today about a research project that I have led over the past more than 1 year, and I'll be talking about its lessons for East Asia. The project is about plutonium for energy, and the only commercial use of plutonium fuel has been MOX in thermal reactors. Those are traditional light water reactors. So that is what we studied. However, the lessons that we found, most of them will apply to any recycling of plutonium for energy, including South Korea's possible plan, which Dr. Klang spoke about, which is pyroprocessing and use of fuel, plutonium fuel in fast reactors. We studied all 7 countries that have commercially produced and or used MOX fuel. We did not study experimental and demonstration use of plutonium, but we did study all 7 countries that are commercially engaged in plutonium fuel. The results are portrayed on our project website. You see the URL there. And we have versions in Korean and in Japanese, and we also have a version in Chinese that will come out soon. The result of our project was a book, Plutonium for Energy. It was just published this month. There are some copies available over there. My copy. And it includes all 7 case studies, and then an introductory chapter that draws lessons from all of these cases and tries to apply them to ongoing and possible future use of plutonium for energy, including in Japan, South Korea, China. Okay, so what did our book find? It found that the plutonium fuel industry is in rapid decline. And the evidence of that is that of the 7 countries that have engaged commercially with plutonium fuel, 5 have either already stopped or have decided to phase out plutonium, their engagement in plutonium fuel. 5 of 7. The only 2 that are left that still plan to continue using plutonium for energy are France and Japan. Additional evidence is that there have been 6 plants for producing MOX fuel commercially in the world. 6. Of those, 5 have already closed. That means there is only 1 plant in the entire world for producing MOX fuel for thermal reactors, and that is in France, and it too is having trouble. And of these plants that closed, these 5 plants, all of them had trouble. That is, they did not come close to reaching their capacity. They had accidents, and in many cases, an accident or the threat of an accident required that the facility would shut down. So why is it that the plutonium fuel industry is in rapid decline? Why? And this is really the big finding from our book. The root cause is the safety and health threat of plutonium. What happens is that plutonium has a fairly high radioactivity, and the primary radiation of concern is alpha radiation. Alpha radiation is not a problem outside of the body because it can be blocked by paper or by skin. So if it's outside your body, you are fairly safe. But if you inhale it and it gets caught in your lungs, now it is putting out radiation constantly and causing mutations in the cells around it. And health physicists believe that is almost guaranteed to cause cancer. So this is a major concern. Governments are concerned, people are concerned, industry is concerned. First of all, this causes public opposition. But the second thing is that the industry says, well, we have to take very big precautions against this health threat. We have to have massive air purification systems. We have to try and do things with automation so that people are not in contact with plutonium. Everything has to be done inside a hot cell, which means no one's actually touching the plutonium. It's only machines that are touching the plutonium. All of this is very, very, very expensive. So that's the first reason that the cost of MOX fuel goes up. But then these companies get nervous. They say, uh-oh, the costs are too high. Let's try to cut the costs. What can we do? And they say, well, let's try to make the facility very, very small. Or let's take other shortcuts. They think they're going to save money, but what happens is that these shortcuts backfire. Because now the facility doesn't work. And so now your production goes down, and that means the cost for each unit of production goes up. So these are the two reasons that plutonium fuel winds up being extremely expensive, but the root cause is the concern about the safety and health threat of plutonium. And when I say that the cost is extremely high, let me show you what I mean. Japan currently pays 9 times as much for imported MOX fuel as traditional uranium fuel. And if Japan goes ahead with domestic production of MOX fuel, it would cost 12 times as much as traditional uranium fuel, and that's according to the Japan Atomic Energy Commission. The other countries that have used this fuel commercially similarly have paid many times more for MOX fuel than for LEU fuel. So this is a main reason, but not the only reason, that the plutonium fuel industry is in sharp decline. The closed fuel cycle, which recycles plutonium for energy, is less popular than nuclear energy. And what I mean by that is that countries turn against plutonium fuel before they turn against nuclear power. So it means that plutonium fuel is even less popular than nuclear energy. And so I list here for you 4 countries where that's true: Switzerland, Belgium, Japan, and Germany. I don't have time to go into all the details of that, but I'd be happy to go into details during the question and answer phase. The other concern, in addition to safety and economics, popularity is security risks. The kind of plutonium that is recycled is known as reactor-grade plutonium, and you might think, oh, that's okay, it's not weapons-grade. But in fact, all reactor-grade plutonium can make reliable nuclear weapons. And I put up here a book by a colleague which also came out just this year, and it's called Reactor-Grade Plutonium and Nuclear Weapons, Exploding the Myths by Gregory Jones. And the myth is that this plutonium is not usable for weapons. And the fact is that this plutonium is usable for nuclear weapons. And that creates big vulnerabilities. First of all, when there are shipments of fresh MOX fuel or plutonium to the plant to make fresh MOX fuel, and then also when fresh MOX fuel is stored at a power plant. So, for example, in Kashiwazaki Kariwa, there is fuel that has been sitting there for 17 years, I believe. That fuel contains enough plutonium for 20 nuclear weapons. This is just an example of the concern. So the last issue, and my last slide, is about, my last two slides, is about Japan's enormous stockpile of plutonium. 47 tons. Of this, 10 tons in Japan, the rest is in Europe, as Takugo-san explained to you. The JAEC has put out a plan which it claims would reduce the plutonium stockpile by expanding the use of MOX, but in fact, this would increase the plutonium stockpile in Japan considerably. And we put out a big critique of this. This is in Arms Control Today. This article is also on the table for free. This came out just last month, and we talk about how this plan, the words are nice, but the ideas will backfire. And in fact, you will go from 10 tons of plutonium in Japan maybe to 40 tons of plutonium in Japan. So we were asked by the host to offer recommendations, and so we offered a different recommendation for what Japan should do with its 47 tons of plutonium. First of all, 22 tons is in the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom has offered to take ownership of that plutonium if it is simply paid to do so. Okay? And so that's what Japan should do. Pay the UK to take ownership of that plutonium. Then there are 10 tons of plutonium in Japan, and only 2 tons of that is in the form of MOX fuel right now. The other 8 tons should be disposed of as waste, and my colleague Dr. Lyman will talk about how the US is disposing of plutonium as waste. And that just leaves another 14 or 15 tons in France, and that can be disposed of as MOX and as waste. And what this means is that if Japan really wants to reduce its plutonium stockpile, it could eliminate its plutonium stockpile in about 5 years. Pay to get rid of some, dispose of some as waste, and the rest you burn as MOX, and then you are done. As long as you don't stupidly construct and operate a new reprocessing plant and a MOX fabrication facility. Thank you very much.
次、米国の憂慮する科学者同盟のエブン・ナイマンさん、よろしくお願いします。
どうもありがとうございました。So we heard that the problem with Japan's plutonium stockpile, and I'm going to talk about the fact that the U.S. also has a problem with the stockpile of plutonium, not only a radiotoxic, but a dangerous nuclear weapons material that it has had a lot of trouble dealing with. I've personally been working on this issue for 25 years, and things may be finally turning in the right direction, but it's been slow. So I'd like to talk about what is going on in the United States and why I think that has lessons for Japan's own path forward for managing its plutonium stockpile. So the U.S. was left with an enormous amount of plutonium at the end of the Cold War when it dismantled a large number of nuclear weapons as part of arms control agreements with the former Soviet Union. Many thousands of bombs worth of plutonium was suddenly no longer needed by the military for nuclear weapons. And that plutonium poses a threat both because from a disarmament perspective, because as long as it's in the form of plutonium components, it can be put back in nuclear weapons relatively rapidly, reversing arms reductions and making the situation more unstable. But it's also vulnerable to theft, because separated plutonium is a material which can be easily transported and concealed. Bombs worth plutonium is very vulnerable to theft, and therefore separated plutonium has to be protected at a very high level of rigor. So the U.S. currently has about 47 metric tons of surplus plutonium that it's considering disposing of, similar to Japan's own stockpile. Included in that amount is over 300 kilograms of plutonium that was in Japan for many years, although it was originally U.S. origin, and that was from the fast critical assembly. That plutonium was shipped back to the U.S. in 2016, and it is now part of the disposal program in the U.S. So what do you do with that separated plutonium that is vulnerable to theft and diversion in its current form? You try to turn it back into the form where it was originally, from which it was originally extracted, which was spent nuclear fuel. And the idea in the U.S. was separated plutonium should be turned back into something like spent nuclear fuel, which is large, heavy. Plutonium is very dilute, and it's highly radioactive, so that it's very hard to access, to transport, or to process. And the concept of the spent fuel standard was if you can do something with plutonium to make it as hard to extract as the plutonium and spent fuel, then you've accomplished the goal. The U.S. identified two different ways to do that. You could either actually turn the plutonium into spent fuel by irradiating it as MOX fuel, or you could just directly dispose of it with high-level waste using a process called mobilization. And this was one concept that the U.S. came up with, where plutonium could be turned into a ceramic form, could be placed into larger canisters, and then immobilized with highly radioactive waste which was left over from where the plutonium was originally processed. This would be a way to make to immobilize the plutonium in a large, heavy object like spent fuel. However, in 2002, the U.S. decided to cancel the immobilization program and just proceed with the MOX program, even though it acknowledged that immobilization would have been much cheaper and could have been accomplished much more quickly than MOX. And the reason why it made that decision was essentially the same reason why the Japanese government is still anxious to use its plutonium as MOX fuel. It's bureaucratic inertia and its bias toward the use of plutonium and against its disposal as waste, ignoring the fact that it is a waste product that has no value. So in 2007, the U.S. Department of Energy began to build a facility to make the plutonium into MOX fuel, and that was in the state of South Carolina. And there's a photograph of the MOX fuel building. The building is almost complete, but the facility is only actually about 30% built, even though they've been working on it for more than 10 years. So today, the cost of the MOX plant has exploded. Originally, the plant would have only cost about $5 billion to build the plant and to turn all the U.S. plutonium into spent fuel. But today, the estimate is now more than 10 times as much, over $57 billion US. And this may sound very familiar to Japanese who have been following the cost escalation of the Rikasho reprocessing The U.S. has already spent $5 billion, but the plan is less than half complete. In fact, it won't be completed until 2048 if at the current rate of progress. And even if it were built, no utility in the United States is committed to saying we will use that fuel after it's produced. So it may end up making fuel that it can't even turn into spent fuel because no utility wants it. So for these reasons, the Department of Energy finally decided the program was a failure, that it could never be completed, it was too expensive, it took too long, and they want to cancel it. And instead, they proposed an alternative, which is called dilute and dispose. And I'll talk about that in the next slide. But their desire to go forward with disposing of plutonium directly as waste was blocked by members of the U.S. legislature from the state of South Carolina who wanted to protect the billions of dollars that was coming into their state from the U.S. government. So very similar to Japanese local politics, it was being blocked by parochial concerns. But finally, only last month, the Department of Energy was able to show that the cost of the alternative would be less than half the cost of Vermont's program, and that made it legally possible for DOE to cancel the program, and so it did. So last month it terminated the program, and it's going to implement dilute and dispose. So what is dilute and dispose? It is a very simple approach where plutonium powder can be mixed at room temperature with a mysterious substance that I'll talk about called stardust. You can dilute the plutonium to less than 10%, this is what the U.S. is doing, and fill waste drums with a very small amount of plutonium, about 200 grams in each drum. It'll be mixed with a material that's supposed to make the combination harder to extract the plutonium to use it in nuclear weapons again, and that's called stardust. And finally, that material will be buried in a geologic repository which the U.S. operates for what's called transuranic waste, that is low-level nuclear waste that's contaminated with long-lived isotopes like plutonium. Now, this is a schematic of the process. It looks complicated, but it's actually quite simple. All you're doing is mixing powders together and pouring them into a can. And I visited a facility which is the size it's used to train people. And here's a photograph of the actual facility where this is done. It's about half the size of this room or smaller. So instead of that enormous MOX plant, you can actually dispose of this plutonium in this small, what's called a glove box facility. There's some more photos that are in the packet. Just a little bit about stardust. Because dilute and dispose doesn't have a high radiation barrier like spent fuel, you need to have other measures to compensate for not having that barrier. So stardust is a material that would make it extremely hard to chemically process to extract the plutonium out from the chemical perspective. And it's impossible to make, you can't make it impossible to extract the plutonium from this mixture. All you can do is make it a lot harder so that a terrorist, for example, would not be interested in stealing it because they know it would be hard for them to get the plutonium. So there are a lot of different ideas. I think that dilute and dispose or some version could be adapted for Japan. Once the material is transuranic waste, it could be disposed of in the Japanese nuclear waste repository, which of course does not exist yet. But according to the law, Japan can dispose of transuranic waste in the geologic repository. So by designating it as transuranic waste, like the U.S. does, it can legally be disposed of in the repository. I don't believe that what the U.S. is doing is exactly appropriate for Japan for various reasons we can talk about. But there are a number of different options for direct disposal that Japan could consider, including mobilizing it with some radioactive waste. For instance, at the Fukushima site, the French company Orano is building a vitrification facility for some Fukushima radioactive waste. It may be possible to use that facility also to dispose of plutonium. That's just an idea of throwing out there. Or a substance called ceramicrete. And this would be a way where you could fuse the plutonium into a solid concrete at room temperature. So it's a low temperature, less hazardous, cheaper process. And that might be a way to solve some of the issues that make what the U.S. is doing not really appropriate for Japan. This would make it more robust and more secure repository. So in summary, well, one more option I'll just mention. I also think that Japan could shift its plutonium to the U.S. for the U.S. to dilute and dispose of in the waste isolation pilot plant. I think, at least for the 8 times to separate plutonium in Japan, that might be a good option. So finally, direct disposal as waste has been proven in the United States, and a similar strategy, I think, is appropriate and a better option than converting Japanese plutonium into mods. And the U.S. example should pave the way for Japan's future. Thank you.
First of all, ecology, because I don't have any point for you to refer it, because I'm a kind of substitute. So I'm just beginning with the cases of Korean bioprocessing. Actually, we don't have the stockpile plutonium or full-scale facility to processing. But maybe we are concerning about the future possibility of the plutonium in like 10 or 20 years. The reason is that the, even though we don't have any plutonium, because unlike the Japan or the United States, South Korean nuclear industry is like a state monopoly. The company, the utility companies are founded by state, funded by state. So only the state are the provider of nuclear energy. And then the regulators also are by the state. So there is some relation, not exactly the kind of monitoring and controlling, but they are in a large boundary. They are like love-hate conflicts. Sometimes they cooperate, and sometimes they are one is regulating the other. And then since about before the 2013, there had been, if we had, but there had been a big noise about the processing or the bioprocessing of all the management of spent fuel. Since state monopoly businesses have been through like more than half century, and then they don't think about the consequences of the increasing spent fuels, and all of a sudden South Korea became much more aware of the political awareness for the democracy and the people's voices rising up. Then they find themselves in the big house with 24 rooms without toilet. So there are 24 running reactors, and we don't have any single place to store this cement, except for the master heavy water reactor was on site, and then the pools to cool the SNL. That's all. So all of a sudden in 2010 to 2012 there was a preparation, and then from the 2013 to 2015, as Dr. Hong told you, there was an engagement, public engagement process to explain and then persuade the public already quite aware, heavily aware of what is the problem with the nuclear energy, and try to persuade them to make a solution to deal with the spent fuel. And 2 years endeavor actually produced nothing, just the same as before. We have envisaged the roadmaps and told them what is necessary, but the people fundamentally opposed the government proposal, and then as Dr. Trump will begin all over again. It's not your own. So, in historical perspective, the promoters of the nuclear energy, that is state, in Korea, really didn't pay any attention to the public side or the safety side at all for tens of years. And then the civil society came reckoning. Then there is a lot of opposing voices against the nuclear energy, and then the kind of feeling that they were the victims of. For example, I have been running the countryside, especially the nuclear reactor side, to explain and tell them that the dry cascade is the not good interim solution for the last 4 years. When most places I come to, or the villages or the local unions or the local government, they really didn't know what the SNF is. It's just 4 or 5 years ago. And they don't know what to do. And then all of a sudden, when the public engagement committee was established and began to perform its supposed action to persuade and educate the people, then they are not easily educated or persuaded. And as a result, I told you that it's simply not produced nothing but it has a failure, because their recommendation, several of them, not a single one has been adopted or been implemented. The basic, the central organ of the so-called power processing and the best reactor is also the part of the carry where Tony is working. Of course, he's not the one of them. Anyway, but all right. And then I just point out the 3 points that how government and the authorities and the promoters of the atomic energy they made a mistake to deal with the SNF problem. First of all, they made a wrong timetable and assumption. In order to make the problem looking more bleak, I mean, Kerry first came out with the about 100,000 tons of SNF by the end of this century. If South Korea is going to build nuclear reactors as planned, of course, which has to change it. And also, they are focusing on the wrong direction. Even for bioprocessing as a scientific development research, okay, but they have tried to sell it by telling them we can reduce the footprint of SNF by like 100 or 100, and the toxicity of 1,000, which is simply possible. And then they left over, they just focused on the TRUs, but left over some very volatile fissile materials. They don't have any plan to deal with that. Maybe they can verify that, but still, I didn't say that. And also, the third is that when they're going to operate the final depository, they didn't even secure the interim storage site. So now still the SNF is still stockpiling very rapidly, but at the same time, we have a very favorable condition because the new president has changed the energy transition plan. We can have some more time to get to the final solution. We are supposed to have like 4,000 tons in the end of 2080, which actually now is 28,000, and half of them are from heavy water reactors. So we can focus on the remaining time period with what to do and how to do it and what to tackle. I hope that the Huang's endeavor will have some result in the end this year. But so far, we are the kind of example of when the government or the promoters deceive the customers, what can happen and where they are ending up. Thank you.
立憲民主党の衆議院議員の大阪誠二と申します。今日は早い時間から本当は参加したかったんですが、国会がいろいろ混乱してまして、今ほんの少しだけの参加ということでお許しをいただきたいと思います。我が党は今原発ゼロ法案というのを国会に提出をしておりまして、日本でこれ以上原子力発電所を続けるのは不可能だろうというふうに思っております。その中でも特に核燃料サイクル、これは日本の核燃料サイクルは破綻しているというふうに思います。その理由はいくつもあるんですが、今日短い時間の中で1点だけ申し上げるとするならば、政府はコストを全く公開しておりません。例えばボックス燃料の価格1体いくらになるのか、これについても政府は公式の場では全く言おうとしないわけです。したがいまして安全性とかエネルギーの効率性とかいろんな課題もあるんですけれども、マーケットの中で生き残っていけるような仕組みではないだろうというふうに思っております。この点を明らかにせずにですね、どんどんまた核燃料サイクルを進めようとしている。最終的にこのツケは国民の皆様に回ってくるわけであります。その負担を国民の皆様に負わせるのは私は不可能だというふうに思っていますので、早い時期に核燃料サイクルから撤退をする、その決断を日本の政府はするべきだろうと思っています。一方で47トンのプルトニウムがありますけれども、この処理についてもこれは国際協調の中で、今日アメリカからクーパーマンさんも来ておりますけれども、アメリカとも十分相談をした中でですね、安全な処理方法、 核兵器に転用されないようにですね、考えていくということが妥当ではないかなというふうに思っております。本当は最後までいられればいいんですけれども、また3時半から国会の中でちょっといろんな動きがあるものですから、一言だけ申し上げて失礼をさせていただきます。シンポジウムがより良いものであることをお祈り申し上げます。ありがとうございます。
原子力指導情報室のデイビスさん、よろしくお願いします。
私の方の話は日本の、再処理プルトニウム利用に関してですが、初めに結論を申しますと、まず再処理は今や資源問題ではないということ、それから再処理には経済性がないということ、それから、再処理を進める理由として廃棄物の、有害廃棄物の量を減らす原用化というふうなことが最近は主張されているんですが、そういうのにつながらないということ、そして最後の結論として根本的な解決は再処理の廃止しかない、こういうことについて、お話をしたいと思います。会社の時間ですので、少し走ることがあると思います。まずその再処理政策の変遷なんですけれども、日本の原子力政策は1956年に、最初に原子力基本計画というのができて、そこで骨格が決まるんですけれども、その中で、目指されたのが自主的な核燃料サイクルと高速増殖炉の開発、これを目標としたわけです。で基本的に今日までそれをキープしてきたんですけれども、実はムンジュが2016年に暮れに廃炉が決まりまして、実質的にこの増殖炉開発というのは放棄されている状態になっています。でもう一つ、使用済み燃料は全量再処理するということが方針となっているために、これは今も引き続き全量再処理が現実的ではないけど方針として残っているという、こういう状態です。で、再処理プルトニウム利用には経済性がないことというのは、2011年に原子力委員会の中の小委員会で、検討が進められまして、そして、そこでは直接処分が一番コストが安いということが明確になりました。この数字は後で見ます。それから放射性廃棄物の総量、最近は廃棄物の量を減らすとか言っているんですけれども、結局高レベル放射性廃棄物だけに着目をすると、それは使用済み燃料とガラス固化体という再処理した後の廃棄物と比べれば、ボリューム体積っていうんですかね、それは小さいということが言えるんですが、しかし再処理することによってその他の廃棄物が出てきます。でそれら全体を加えていく、あるいは再処理工場自体も将来的には廃棄物になるわけですから、その全体を考えれば実は再処理して放射性廃棄物の量というのは減らないどころかむしろ増えるということになります。その点政府の高レベルだけに着目と全体を見ていくということの、政府の方はその全体を見るということに欠けているわけですね。それが2つ目に言うべきことです。それから3点目として、再処理で回収されるプルトニウムは軽水炉で消費する計画になっている。かつては高速増殖炉で使うというふうになっていたんですが、今やすべて軽水炉で消費する、そういう計画なんですが、軽水炉での利用というのは実は全然順調には進んできていないということです。それから政府は電力自由化が進展する中で、実はその再処理の維持というのは困難だということを2017年ですか、明らかにしました。したがってそれへのつまり再処理維持することは困難だ、だけど全量再処理政策がある、そういう中で、使用済み燃料再処理機構というものを設立しまして、これは認可法人になっていて、経済産業省が
の認可によって、法人が設立され、経済産業省の認可によって再処理量等が承認されるという、こういう構図になっているんですが、そこを設立して、電力会社が仮に破綻したりしても、再処理が継続できるようなシステムを作りました。その時合わせて、費用ですね、将来に必要となる再処理の費用、これについては、その原子力発電所の、使用済み燃料が出てきた時点で、つまり発電時点で、拠出金として、回収しようということにしています。したがって当面ですね、どんどん拠出金が出てくる。そして六ヶ所再処理工場は全く再処理してないんだけど、毎年2000数百億円ずつ必要な費用として払っていくという、こういう構図になっているんです。で、当面はこの点で一応乗り切れるかもしれないけれども、将来的に経営的な破綻、再処理する使用済み燃料は残っているけれどもお金がないという、こういう事態になるのは必至だと思います。したがって、当面乗り切り策はできたんだけど、将来の策は全然作られていない、破綻に向かって進んでいくしかないだろうというふうに思われます。最後の点として、プルトニウムの需給調整をするというふうに、第5次エネルギー計画、昨年の今年の7月にまとめられた中で、最後の段階になって、パブリックコメントの中ではほとんどこれに触れているコメントはなかったんだけれども、やはりこれはアメリカ等々のいろんな声があったんでしょう。プルトニウムの余剰、今持っている48トンのプルトニウムを削減すると、それについては、供給側の調整も含めて対応するんだというふうなことを表明しました。そして、今日の会場で少しも出てきているように、ここにあるプルトニウムについては、向こうに引き取ってもらう交渉をつい先日、第1回目の会議が開かれたというニュースが入ってきております。そんな状況で、それなりに余剰を減らしていくという姿勢は政府は取っている。しかし現実的にどうなのかというのは若干疑問のあるところです。これは再処理プルサーマルの経済性で、2011年の先ほど言いました原子力小委員会の結果です。細かいところは抜きにして、合計のところだけ言いますと、全量再処理路線を続ける、直接処分をやる、そして現状というのは6箇所はもうしょうがないから動かすけど、それ以降は直接処分に切り替えましょうというオプションで、コスト計算をしました。したところ、割引率が 0% では、直接処分が一番安い、それからその次に再処理政策、次に現状というふうになっています。この割引率というのは、将来にかかる費用を現時点に割り引いてくる、0% は全く割り引かないで評価をしている、3% は、その利息みたいなですね、評価をしている。ですから 3% で40年後にできるやつは現在の価値でいうと大体3割ぐらいの評価になっているということです。そんなことでやりました。しかしこれは、5000万キロワットの発電設備を持っていることを前提にと評価しているんです。今23基の原発が廃炉になりましたので、新しく評価をし直さないといけないというのは、先ほどの、大阪議員のおっしゃるとおりだということです。で、最後のスライドですが、こんな状態なので、これは午前中のセッションで田久保さんも少し出してくださっていましたが、トータルとして48トンほどのプルトニウムが、あるという、こういう中で、将来的にどういうふうに見ていけばいいのかというのを見たものです。で、4つぐらいのオプションがあると思います。1つは6カ所がフル活動をする。そしてプルサーマルが進まない、こういう事態になったとしたら、プルトニウム余剰がどんどん増えていくということになります。2つ目のオプションとして、6カ所はこれ、政府が稼働させるということなんですが、フル稼働し、プルサーマルも計画通りに進んだとして、この計画通りというのは、 16基から18基の原発で、プルトニウムを使うという、こういう計画です。若干16から18基相当の原子炉でって言った方がいいかもしれませんが、そういうふうに、計画通りに進めば、これはもともとの計画が6カ所から出てくる分と見合うようにできていますので、現在ある余剰というものはそのまま残ってしまうということになります。3つ目のオプションとして、プルサーマル6カ所はもう廃止しましょうと、そしてプルサーマルが少しずつ進んでいくというふうになれば、プルトニウムの余剰というのはなだらかに減っていくだろう、こういうふうに思われます。最後のオプションとして、6カ所を廃止して、プルサーマルもやめて、先ほどエドライマさんの話にあったように、これは何らかの形で、燃料として使わない政策に変えた場合に、これもかなり急激に進んでいくということになります。プルサーマルで、そのプルトニウムを消費するか、もうそれをやめて直接処分、つまり燃料として使わない政策にするかということについては、議論の余地があると思いますし、実は細かく検討していくと、全て、例えばその燃料として使わないオプションが可能なのかというふうなことを考えると、ちょっと難しいところもあるかと思います。かといって、じゃあ逆に全てプルサーマルちょっとずつでもいいから進めていこうかと思うと、例えば国内にある、日本原子力研究開発機構 JAEA にある4トンは、ほとんど軽水炉では使わない計画ですし、そしてまた田久保さんがちょっと話してたように、不燃の燃料をフランスで再処理するということになれば 1.3 トンぐらい増えるし、同じように、これは政治的な判断から文殊の燃料もフランスで再処理するという方向に動いたとすれば、さらに3トンぐらいプルトニウムが増えるだろう。こういったものについては軽水炉で使う計画がありませんので、何らかの形で、処理をしていかないといけない、そんなふうに思います。したがってこの下の方の2つというのは、これからよく議論して、私たちは良い選択肢を使っていかないといけないということです。いずれにせよ、こういう中で6カ所再処理工場を動かすというのは、プルトニウムを増やすことにつながるので、ぜひともこれは避けるべきというのが私の結論です。以上で終わります。どうもご清聴ありがとう
ございました。ではこれから30分ほど間パネラー同士で議論お話をしていただければというふうに思います。で、私の方から大きく3つのエリアでご質問したいと思いますので、よろしくお願いします。で、ご回答をされているときにぜひ念頭に入れていただきたいのは、多くの市民が参加しているので、この問題にどういうふうに市民も関われるかということ、それを念頭に入れながらご発言していただければというふうに思います。で、大きく言ってですね、3つお尋ねしたいんですけれども、そのうちの一番初め、ファンさんのご発言で、韓国からのお二人からもすごく切実に原発を動かして使用済み燃料の問題、これがいかにもう難題になっているかというご発言があったんですけれども、その背景の中でですね、この政府の方がやはり直接調査という話があるけれども、それより例えばいい代替の方法があるのではないかという研究をしていきましょうと。で、その中でですね、政府はパイロプロセスについての基礎研究をサポートするというお話がありました。で、パネラー、マックスさんも含めてパネラーからお話聞きたいのは、ゴミ使用済み燃料の問題を削減するためには再処理は解決策ではないというご発言はまた他のパネラーからお二人ありましたけれども、やっぱりその問題について皆さん全員どう思われるか、そ それからやっぱりタイムプロセッシングが韓国でリサーチとして続いているということについてどう思われるかご意見いただければというふうに思います。Start commenting on the two comments about one was the reduction of the toxicity in water, that 100 from 1,000 is not correct, and also another comment about reprocessing not being a solution to this problem, and then if other people will comment.
Yeah. Tell us a comment from Mr. Kim Seung-woo about the volume reduction.
In radiotoxicities. Yeah, I agree with him. The real thing is that volume reduction is not so important. So even though you have a significant volume reduction, that doesn't necessarily mean that you will reduce the risk at all. So what's the key point for the repository is the thermal loading, heat from the radiation. So unless you can kill all the radiation from the radioactive material, it doesn't happen. Also, some people claim, especially the sodium test reactor, people claim that reducing the toxicity is the key. I don't agree with that. It's nothing to do with the safety. The safety is determined by the release of the radionuclide into the solute formation, water formation. So to reduce the toxicity doesn't mean anything for the safety of the repository. So that's the fact. But I partly disagree with some of the comment of the economy. The economy is a very difficult one. Of course, if you go for the reprocessing, it's more expensive than direct disposal. But is it really expensive than the natural gas or the petrol? It might not. Some people claim that if you go for the MOX reprocessing, the fuel cost will be increased up to 10 times. That might be true or not, but if you take a look at the system of the entire nuclear business cost, you may be surprised. Because the portion of the fuel cost in nuclear industry is very tiny, between 4% to 10%. So if we have, for example, 5 times increase of the fuel cost, it doesn't necessarily mean you have a significant cost increase for the electricity generation. So you have to be very careful when you are talking about the economy. So whenever you are talking about the economy of the special fuel cycle, you have to include all the components from the uranium mine, reactor operation, reactor construction, and the final storage of the spent nuclear fuel.
Thank you for the various points that were brought up. If the other panelists would like to comment on that, and in light of also South Korea pursuing research on the pyrolysis.
Right, so first on the issue of volume reductions, so of course everyone's right, volume reductions make a difference. Thermal loading is the limiting factor for a repository, but thermal loading is determined by the long-lived transuranics like plutonium. And so if you do not have, if your system doesn't get rid of those actinides, then you're not doing anything with
If you could, you are all technical people, but if you could speak loudly and also very, very clearly about the issue continue to speak in easily understandable.
The long-term thermal loading is determined by the long-lived actinides. So that's a thermal loading.
Yeah.
Yes, but you are talking about the long-term thermal loading. But when you design the repository, the initial thermal loading is very important. So the initial thermal loading is controlled by a lot of fission products, whose lifetime is shorter than transferring element. So the strontium and the cesium 137 actually determines all the thermal loading for the designing of the replicator. So it's different.
Probably this could go on with the back and forth. So there are two.
So on the issue of power processing, it's economic. So first of all, by just saying that the fuel cost would only be a small fraction, and a large increase in the cost of fuel would only have a small increase in the cost of electricity production. That may be true if you're spreading out the cost of all the electricity ratepayers, but you have to consider the societal cost and the fact that there is a large subsidy. So it's misleading to just look at it as an increase in fuel. And the other point, power processing, the only actual power processing operation that just municipal fuel has been going on in the United States for 20 years. And the cost of that facility is many times more than the cost of package processing. It's astronomical. And so there's no evidence right now that power processing would be cheaper than package processing.
You thank God that I'm not a technical people.
And I have two more other areas I would like to discuss.
I don't get into the economics of the plutonium fuel. Rather, in Korea, the trouble is, root of the trouble is kind of social receptivity and discrepancy with the effect and what is taught. I myself is a supporter of the entering storage in the dry casket and then directly to the final repository. You know that Korea is a small country, especially South Korea. I agree that with that most of the people in the fuel cycle that it is extremely difficult to find a proper place within this small country. But at the same time, my position is to then, why don't we go for the entry storage in the casket and then find out the technical solution over the time that have some more regular basis, right?
So on the economics, we talk about this in the book. I actually talk about it in the introductory chapter of the book. What Dr. Huang is talking about is that the cost of producing nuclear energy at the beginning is dominated by the cost of building the reactor. So what you do is you don't pay for all the reactors at the beginning, you finance it, and then you say, okay, over the next 20 years we will pay for the cost of building this reactor, 20, 30 years. And during that period, the cost of paying off the reactor is much bigger than the cost of buying fuel each year for the reactor. So he's right. In those years, the cost of fuel is only maybe 5 or 10% of the total cost. So if you decide to use MOX, it's 1/3 of the core, and it costs 5 times as much, it's another 5–10% increase in your total cost of producing energy. Not a big deal. However, eventually, you pay off the cost of building the reactor. And now, your fuel costs are a major portion of your total costs. Let's say 30% of your total costs. And at that point, if you decide to introduce MOX, and it costs 5 times as much as uranium fuel, now your total cost of producing energy go up 40%. Now in the old days, no big deal. You just say everybody has to pay 40% more. But today we have liberalized
electricity markets. And so consumers have a choice. And if you say, well, this nuclear energy costs 40% more than it used to, they say, okay, we'll use a different kind of energy. Okay, so I agree with you in the short run. I don't agree with you on the long run. And just the other thing I will say about the South Korean plan, and again, maybe it's almost defunct because the president of South Korea doesn't like this old plan. But the plan to use prior processing and then fast reactors. These are reactors with fast neutrons, not like the reactors in Japan that use thermal neutrons. This is economically, I would say, insane. Because what you're saying is we're going to use the most expensive fuel possible in the most expensive reactors possible. And at some point, that is going to be more expensive, I think, than any other form of energy that I can imagine.
ありがとうございました。短くすみません。次、あと2つ。
そのコストと廃棄物についてなんですが、日本では福島の事故の後、コストの再評価がされて、今や他の電源、石油、石炭、火力発電所といいますか、その火力と比べて原子力の方が高いということがはっきりしています。さらにその中でその評価は結局その自己対応費用とかですね、原子力に対するさまざまな補助金とか出ている、そういったものをみんなテーブルに載せてコスト計算しようということになったから、上がっていったわけです。その上でその中でもまだ評価をされていないのが、結局その廃棄物処分について分かる範囲は考慮しましたけれども、しかしまだ処分場も決まっていない、どういうふうに処分するかということも、一般的なことは決まっているけど細かくは決まっていない、そういうアンノーンな部分がすごく残っているわけですね。だからそこをやっぱりクリアにしないと、単に原子力そのコストが安いということは言えないではないかというふうに思います。それと最近のパイロプロセッシングもその大きな理由として廃棄物を削減するということがあったと思いますが、先ほども言いましたように廃棄物出てくる全量を低レベルも含めて処理処分していくという観点でどうなのかということを、総合的に評価をしないといけないんじゃないかというふうに、私は考えています。
ありがとうございます。それではあと2つのエリアでもしご発言いただければ、1つが日本の洋上プルトニウム48トン近くあるんですけども、その処分方法としてライマンさん、そしてクルマンさんからご提案がありましたけども、それについてのコメント、それをまずしていただきたい。そして最後にですね、休憩前に日本の再処理計画6カ所がまだ続いているという、そのことについてコメントをいただければと思います。まずはじめに余剰プルトニウムの処分の提案についてよろしくお願いします。
余剰プルトニウムの削減ということで、エドさんの方からそのアメリカでの新しいやり方、スターダストっていうんですかね、そういう物質を混ぜることによって二度とそれを核兵器に転用できないような形で処分しようという、こういうふうな計画だと思いますが、日本もなんていうか積極的にその研究を進めていく場合によってはアメリカと共同して、その研究を進めていくということが、必要だと思います。でそれは国内のプルトニウムについて、その対応というのが可能になるし、一部は可能にしなければならないようなものだと思います。でフランスにある分についてはこれが難しい、15トンほどありますけれども、本当にそういうパターンでいけるかどうかということを研究しないといけないし、フランスが引き取るということについてはなかなか難しいんじゃないかと思いますが、若干そこはいろいろ議論があるかもしれない。場合によってはその部分についてだけはMOXとして、費用がかかっても使わないといけないかもしれない。でもその辺は 向こうの状況も含めて冷静に議論をして決めていかなければいけない問題だと思っています。
Anybody else would like to comment on the Japanese plutonium disposal? Two people commented on ideas on how to dispose it. If you want to elaborate more, or anybody else? No comments? Okay. I'm sure there's a long discussion about how to concretely actually implement those ideas. But should we go on to the next subject? Then a couple more comments from the two speakers that proposed this. We have to figure out how to reduce the stockpile. Or any comment from you about the morning session and the government's way of stating that, or not stating it?
Okay, so since everything we've said is so logical, you might say to yourself, why is the Japanese government, which is also so logical, why don't they embrace our ideas and say, okay, MOX is incredibly expensive, it raises safety concerns, it raises security concerns, there's no shortage of uranium if we want to continue with nuclear power, so it makes no sense to continue with reprocessing and recycling of plutonium and MOX fuel, and we are going to follow this Cooperman-Lyman plan, and we're going to not start Boccaccio and not build JMOX, and we're going to reduce the plutonium stockpile as fast as possible through a mixture of disposing of plutonium as waste, paying the United Kingdom, and burning a little bit of MOX, and all the plutonium is gone in 5 years, and the era of plutonium in Japan is over. So logical. Why hasn't the Japanese government decided to do this? And there are many reasons. Some is the fact that people are personally invested in this, bureaucratically invested in this, financially invested in this. But one of the big problems which we identify in the Japan chapter of our book is the fact that if you don't say you're going to reprocess the fuel and recycle the plutonium, then where is the spent fuel going to go? So, and people near the reactors, they don't want to keep it. The people in Aomori Prefecture, where spent fuel is sent to be reprocessed, they don't want to keep it. And so it's this domestic political concern about where will we put the waste that is propelling this decision to continue reprocessing and recycling the plutonium that has economic security and safety risks and dangers. So it's sort of the tail, we say in English, the tail wagging the dog. The dog is supposed to wag the tail, but in this case, this question of unpopularity of nuclear waste is leading to this completely irrational decision to reprocess and recycle plutonium. So I think that if our proposals are not adopted, it will be for many of those reasons, but I think that last one is very important.
Thank you.
So, you know, every option though has risks. So, you know, when you're talking about geologic disposal of anything, there are people who oppose geologic repositories in the U.S., in Japan, and in South Korea. So that may not be popular. Also, some options may involve transportation of plutonium long distances over the ocean or land. Everything has risks, and the fact is, plutonium was created, and once it was made, you have to do something with it to reduce its risk, and you have to choose the option that is not as bad as the other options. they're all bad. And the problem has occurred because the plutonium was produced in the first place. So the first step is not to produce any more plutonium and continue to create a waste stream, which is so hard to dispose of. It just doesn't make any sense. But there's no easy answer, and I don't want to give the impression that there is. And so you just have to be very pragmatic and assess which is the option that's going to be least harmful overall to the environment and has the least risk of being misused for nuclear weapons.
Thank you. Just have a couple minutes left.
Yeah, I totally agree with Ed, actually. So we already have a whole bunch of spent nuclear fuel, and we have to find a certain way to manage it. And there might be a simple solution like a direct disposal. So we are ending, but unfortunately we are ending up with some kind of paradox. So many people are against direct disposal. So there should be another alternative. Then we are trying to do something like box fuel or spiral processing. So it's really up to the general citizen to find out the proper way to minimize the risk while safely manage the spent nuclear fuel. So it's all our responsibility how to manage the spent fuel securely and safely.
Thank you very much.
I will be Alan and Ed and Juan together, but for your theory of the whack dog, I totally agree with that, and that in the current situation, that there are small, not small, more natural researchers, professors, industries, and government bureaucrats have been gaining something in the nuclear industry and the new development out of this. They are strong supporters of such a scheme, and then I think all here we are, the citizens, the civil society, has to do more to monitor them and supervise them and cut it off.
Thank you very much. I think that since it is springtime right now, this last question, which was what Ban-san touched on about Japan's food processing program still going on, and wanting to ask all of you what you think about that, comment directly on Japan's program. Perhaps during the question and answer period, you could also address that issue. That might be good. And at the end, Wang-san was saying how there needs to be more citizen involvement about what to do with the spent nuclear fuel. Spent nuclear fuel is often considered like a debt that we are piling up. And usually when you keep piling up the debt, the first thing you should do is stop continuing to pile up further debt. And so that issue, I think, is what citizens could perhaps raise as, first, let's not make the problem worse, which again would be good to have panelists comment on. But let us first have a break and take tea. Oh, okay, the coffee has not arrived yet, so, okay, so when the coffee arrives, we will start the break. And one proposal I had is, we definitely want to get our coffee, take a little break, but perhaps during the time we drink coffee, we can also ask questions and get answers. But okay, until the coffee arrives, maybe then the last, oh, it just arrived right now. So, ちょっと待ってください。今コーヒーが来たんで、またコメントがあったらぜひ。またじゃあ今のご質問とか発言休憩の後続けていきましょう。処理政策が今でも続いているバンさんのご発言それについて海外からの皆さんとかにしご意見いただければというふうに思います。まだリア ヤホンつけてないみたいなので英語でも言います。As everybody is getting seated, I could ask the question about Japanese reprocessing programs still continuing and what those of you from abroad think about that, your opinion about it. Alan, Ed, were you able to, Dr. Lyman and Dr. Cooperman, were you able to hear the question? If you could all address that. Thank you very much.
So on the question about Japanese processing of I think I already did make it reprocessing has never made sense from an economic, energy, resource, or technical perspective. It's also, from an environmental perspective, it's very damaging. But the worst thing about reprocessing is that it extracts plutonium from spent fuel. So you're taking a waste form where plutonium is not accessible, is not readily accessible for use in nuclear weapons, and you turn it into a form where it can be much more easily converted to a nuclear weapon component or be stolen by terrorists and used to make an improvised nuclear device. So reprocessing, you're paying a lot of money to create safety and security risks that are completely unacceptable. And as I talked about, to get rid of plutonium that you've separated costs even more money, and there's no clear path for eventually separating plutonium in the world. It's a liability, and you're just spending money to separate it, and you're spending money to get rid of it, and getting a lot of extra risk in the process. So of course, it doesn't make sense. Japan should not operate with caution. There are alternative uses for the facility. One might consider maybe options for disposing of the existing stockpile, which we can talk about, but there's no purpose other than political and bureaucratic inertia that we've heard about for using the facility to increase Japan's plutonium stockpile.
Any comments on what should be done? ちょっとまだ質問まもなくして始めるので、最後に日本のプルトニウムについてとお菓子について何か特別になければ、まだ随分あると思いますけれども、とりあえずそれで質疑に入りましょう。それではこれから30分ほどぜひ多くの質問を受けたいと思います。でできるだけ多くの質問を受け付けられるように質問申し訳ないんですけど非常に短くしてください。そして2つずつ質問を受けていきたいと思いますので、初めの2つの質問について挙手お願いします。ご質問ある方、よろしくお願いします。どなたでも。はい。
I am a physicist, so my field is accelerator physics. And my question is about, and if, in the Korean case, for example, have you already studied to use accelerator to reduce the number of amount of the plutonium, or something like that, reduce this kind of vibration?
じゃあ2つずつ質問を受け付けたいので、全然違う質問で結構ですので、ありましたら、じゃあ後ろの方、
スターダスト計画について伺いたいんですが、あるシンポジウムで、客席の方からアメリカに日本が技術を教わってですね、でそれで解決していったらいいんじゃないかという意見が出たところ、これは軍事機密なんで教えられないという 意見が出たことがあるんですが、これは事実でしょうか。でその場合には日米共同研究ではいけないのかなと思うんですが、いかがでしょうか。
ありがとうございます。ではこの2つの質問ですけれども、ご発言お願いします。よろしくお願いします。
Yes, that's an interesting question. And we are doing the fundamental research on the so-called separation of the UPLAN, so partitioning and transmutation, very hard actually. So we have started that program from the beginning of 1992, I believe. I was the first member, and we are still doing that one for the fundamental study. So even though you are very familiar with parallel processing, we are trying to find a lot of alternative ways. But there are a lot of technical challenges, as you might know. To continuously produce the large current supply is a big issue. And also it can be weaponized if you have a good success. So there are a lot of pros and cons about partitioning and transmutation.
Anybody else? For the second question?
So on the question of the Stardust technology, the questioner is right that it was developed by essentially the nuclear weapons establishment in the US. And the details of it are not made public because, for instance, the chemical composition of the Stardust, because if it was, then it would help people figure out how to actually process it. But the main information is not, it's considered what's called official use only in the US, which is not a legal designation. And so that material could be shared with another country like Japan on an official basis. However, there are aspects of the process that are being studied that are considered classified. And classified is a designation that under U.S. law, that is much harder to share with foreign government. So my recommendation is that as much information about this be not classified and only considered official use only to facilitate its sharing information with other countries.
ありがとうございます。よろしいですか。それではあと2つ次の質問、どなたでも、はい、よろしくお願いします。
ライバンさんに質問する疑問です。ライバンさんは再処理や木質はダメよと言いながら地層処分を推進しておられる。でも僕は地層処分にも反対なんですよ。で、なぜあなたは地層処分に賛成する、推進したがるのか。現実に WIPP のような施設を日本で作ることはできません。そもそも WIPP は軍事施設じゃないですか。たまたま軍事施設を民生利用しただけです。で、さらに言えばヨーロッパではいまだにフィンランドの温カロがやれないでいる。スウェーデンもストップ、ドイツもストップですよ。で、最初にヨーロッパでやれる可能性があるとすれば、フランスのビュール研究所です。でもあれは使用済み核燃料再処理工場で作ったキャニスターを、ガラスを出したキャニスターを地層処分するもの。直接処分じゃないですね。で、それくらいに地層処分ってやるのがいいんですよ。
そしたらまずそれが1つ目の質問で、もう1つ受け付けたいと思いますので、はい、後ろの方よろしくお願いします。
Yeah, this is a question to the whole panel. The issue of the logic that determines governments continuing these illogical programs. Could you respond to the issue that maybe was mentioned this morning, which is the actual strategic logic, which is a de facto deterrent, and at this moment in history when there's great instability, in this region, unclear how it's going to go, why it would be that any government would give up its potential weaponized option. And the point I make to Korean speakers is keeping the nuclear community happy in South Korea at this moment when they've just announced a phase out. You're keeping that option. You don't know what's going to happen. Hopefully there will be a denuclearized peninsula, but the work at Daejeon, Daedo, the PIE, all those facilities were part of the South Korean weapons option. The Japanese government know that. So there's a strategic logic to maintaining these programs. The economics and safety and environmental impacts, there are irrelevant going forward in this region, which means we need a much bigger vision about denuclearization.
Thank you. それでは今の2つの質問について、じゃあまず初めの質問について、ライマンさんお願いします。
Yeah, so the question about geologic disposal, as I did say before, in this kind of problem, you have to look at the situation that's been created and try to find the option that is not as bad as the others. And when you're talking about separated plutonium, if you were to store it, you can't make it disappear. That's the first principle. Some people claim you can with reactors, but in practice, it's not possible over a human time scale. So you can't make it disappear. What do you do with it so that you reduce the danger of exposure? And if it's separated plutonium, not only is it an environmental hazard, if there's a fire in a storage facility and it becomes airborne, or if it's attacked by terrorists, or if it's stolen by terrorists and used to make nuclear weapons. And so when it's stored above ground, you have to protect it with very high security, higher security than is typical in Japan, unfortunately, and with a high degree of environmental protection. And you have to maintain that indefinitely, because plutonium has a half-life of 24,000 years. It's going to be around for hundreds of thousands of years. So by saying we're going to keep it in storage above ground indefinitely means our society has to come up with a way to make sure that future generations will protect it. So the alternative is to develop an underground repository where at least the need for our generation to ensure that their security guards working 1,000 years from now won't be necessary or will be less essential. So we've created the problem. We have to find the option that's not as bad as the others. I agree with you. There are issues, safety and political issues associated with finding a waste disposal site. No one wants it where they live. And that's a problem we've created. And we need to do the best we can to sympathize with it. It is possible, though, to delay the need for a repository by using the diluted disposal, because it reduces the attractiveness of the plutonium to terrorists, then there's less of a threat maintaining it above ground until a permanent disposal option can be found. You still need to maintain security, but maybe less of it.
I partly agree with you. All the nuclear technology is somehow the latent technology to make a weapon. So that's the fact. Especially in this Northeast Asian region, there is no trust at all to me. So there is no trust among China, Japan, and Korea. So we are having a hard time at this moment. especially when you consider the denuclearization of the DPRK. It will become a very important issue. So if you are in the shoes of the DPRK, will you be happy if you allow Japan to continuously operate Shimura while they have to dismantle all the Yongbyon nuclear facility? So it's a big issue for the future. But what's really important is for our common prosperity for the future, we should work together as a team to develop a so-called regional security system to assure the peace in this region. For that one, we should develop some kind of step-by-step approach. So we should have a lot of opportunity to discuss this kind of matter all together. Otherwise, we cannot actually solve the security problem in this region at all. So I particularly agree.
ちょっと待ってください。まだ通訳のちょっと待ってください。ちょっと待ってください。今の質問は2番目の質問だったので、2番目の質問についてコメントもっとありましたら。
ショーンの質問に対してなんですけど、その推進の戦略的ロジック、日本におけるその戦略的ロジックを分析するのはなかなか難しいんですが、一つは、江戸さんが少し言及したように、日本の官僚が、惰性的に、昔の政策を維持しているというのが一つあります。それは日本の官僚制度の、悪弊みたいなところから来ていると思います。あまり細かくこれ説明するとややこしいのでこの程度にしますが、もう一点はやっぱり日本の中に、再処理が核兵器につながる、あるいは核兵器を作ろうとすれば再処理技術というのは絶対必要で、その技術は維持しておかなければならないというふうに考えている人たちが、いるということですね。これは午前中石坂さんが少し、核兵器を開発する野望を持っている人たちがいるというふうにおっしゃってましたけど、日本の中のあるグループにはそういった人たちがいる。でその人たちの声というのが何らかの形で強く影響していて、やめられないというか、再処理を維持してしまうというか、そういう状況にあるというふうに言っています。でずっともう一点だけ言うと、日本は実は直接処分、使用済み燃料の直接処分の研究というのをやっていて、第一次レポートができています。で第二次レポートはこれは一応直接処分ですので、地層処分の安全評価というものをしないといけなくて、今それの途中にあります。でそれがうまく出てくると、今の最終処分法という法律の改正で、ガラス固化体も使用済み燃料もどちらも処分していい方向に、法律の改正をする大きな計画になっています。ただこれがいつ頃になるかについてはなかなか勢力が拮抗していてわからないんですが、研究だけは続けているということを付け加えておきたいと思います。
で初めの質問は江戸さんに伝えたいんですけども、これはプルトニウムだけじゃなくて使用済み燃料一般について地層処分じゃなく地上でずっと管理できるようにした方がいいんじゃないかっていう観点で聞いたと思うんですね。でこれは非常に重要な質問なんですけども、残された時間がこの核燃料サイクルとその再処理、MOX とかそっちの方面を議論する必要なので、ワンススルーの要するに使用済み燃料を地層にするか地上にするかっていうのは申し訳ないですけども、まだいろんな議論が続いていくと思うので、ちょっと一旦
それ言っちゃうと、じゃあフィンランド、スウェーデン、ドイツは間違ってるんで、日本はフィンランド、スウェーデン、ドイツが間違ったことはしてはいけませんよって言ってるのと同じになっちゃうんですよ。 ライマンさんの言ってることは。
今それは通訳の方がライマンさんに言ってると思うので、でも申し訳ないです。残された時間、他にこの今日のテーマ、日韓の核燃料サイクル政策、その影響と代替策というところで大きくその後半の議論ですね、後半のセッションについて特化して、もし他にご質問がありましたら、ぜひでも今のご猶予ですね、直接お話ししたいと思うので、終わった時はやり取りをしたいと思いますと今ライマンさん言いました。他に今まで受け付けた質問についてもう一個。
I just wanted to address Mr. Bernie's question. You know, I'm a professor of international security. I teach courses in international security, military strategy, and in that world, everybody thinks the reason that Japan has plutonium is to display its nuclear weapons doctrine. And people in the Pentagon think that's the reason that Japan has plutonium. But you know, when I try to explain my understanding of Japan's decision-making, it's based on my understanding of all political decision-making, which is that political decisions are not made for one reason. I used to work in the US Congress. There was never a vote where the vote was won for one reason. What you need is 50+% of people or voters to support something. And they support it for very different reasons. And I think it's very similar, actually, with Japan's continuation of its plutonium stockpile. So, as I said, you know, some people support it because they make money from the industry. And other people support it because they supported it 30 years ago, and if they change their mind now, they lose face. And other people support it because they're cowardly politicians who think, oh, if I oppose plutonium, then people are going to get mad at me for dumping nuclear waste on their village or community. And some people support it for the reason you say, which is that it's a very nice sort of peacock display of our nuclear weapons potential. You asked the question, devil's advocate maybe, in style, why would anyone give up their plutonium when it is a clear, latent nuclear deterrent? And what I would say is that it is unnecessary for Japan to keep the plutonium for those reasons. And that's because Japan is an extremely sophisticated, technological society. And so, if it got rid of all of its plutonium, and then all of a sudden it decided it needed nuclear weapons, it could do it very quickly. I know that, you know that, China knows that, North Korea knows that, everybody knows that. So I believe that Japan has a latent nuclear deterrent anyway. And what it gets for its 47 tons of plutonium is negative for Japan's interests. It gets hostility from neighbors. It gets, North Korea now has an excuse to keep its plutonium because it can say, well, why should we get rid of our plutonium when Japan has 100 times more plutonium? That's actually a very good question. So I agree with you. I think some people in Japan support the plutonium stockpile for reasons of nuclear deterrence, but I think it's unnecessary and counterproductive.
ではさらにご質問を受け付けたいと思います。よろしくお願いします。
すみません、今のことはどうかもしれません。再処理をやるというので、先ほどの答えとして、政治的、官僚的に多勢であって、それと潜在的な核保有と考えている人たちで、また原子力村の利権構造というのがあるというような理由があると思うんですが、それに対してですね、私たちというか市民側はどういうふうな対抗というか、その変えていく方法があるのか、 そういうことなの少しでもヒントがあれば教えていただきたいと、そういうふうに思います。
ありがとうございます。それでは最後の質問になるかと思うんですけど、後ろの。
Thank you very much. My question will go to two Korean speakers. Just related with the previous question regarding the nuclear latency and the nuclear potentiality. So, is there any small group inside South Korea who think about this pilot processing will be a future option for nuclear deterrence? Like as Ban-san mentioned, in case of Japan, some security elite people and very neutral conservative politicians think about the reprocessing might be a future option for nuclear deterrent by ourselves. But any group in South Korea are okay, any security people or military people or politicians think about this option would be a political feasible? That's my question. Thank you.
では最後の質問2つありますので、初めの質問にありました。教えてくださいという質問です。よろしくお願いします。
会場でいろんな人が喋るのがいいようになってる。
Yes, it's a very important and time question. Also, I'm actually making progress. I'm engaging in that kind of business already. Coming to questions, in any country that there is some interest groups and networkings and obviously all kind of so-called national interest, and for the reason they pursue the kind of power position, including nuclear weapons. I think that because I'm also background in international security and nuclear strategy. The situation like in North Korea, Northeast Asia these days, is really kind of volatile and changing quickly. And then one anecdote that I went to China 2 months ago, one of the guy that has in the peace business asking me, not to Hajime-san, but to me, do you think that Japanese stockpile of plutonium consists of the latent, or he didn't say the latent, deterrents? I was frankly shocked. I mean, I didn't think about that way, but I know that in other countries, people think that Japan's position of huge stockpile of plutonium is seen as their way. In Korea, frankly, that somebody is talking about the nuclear weapons, possession, nuclear submarine, whatever it takes. But that basically is from the North Korean negative impact on the South Korean society. Most sound and logical thinking South Koreans know that in South Korea, even if you want to, you can't. In Japan, when it goes down to the 20 years collapse for in 10 years back, Japanese economy, especially the export and import, is just 15% of the whole GDP. In Korea, it's 106%. So little bit of economic sanctions just for a couple of months, you go. If you want to, you can.
Yeah, I'd like to. I'd like to comment on the latent technology using the pyro processing. That there are around 50 million people living in South Korea, so there might be people who claims that pyro processing might be the latent technology. Yeah. But in reality, I believe that if you like really go for the weaponization, then there might be a better way. So pyro processing is a very traditional technology. So I do not propose it if I were in the shoes.
The first question.
Thank you. I mentioned in, so this is the question about what can civil society do. I mentioned in my presentation that in 4 of the 7 countries we examined, the country decided to reduce plutonium use, as recycling of plutonium, before it decided to phase out nuclear power. And that didn't happen by magic. That happened through the efforts of civil society. So, you know, for example, we can look in Japan. And Japan's plan was to start the use of MOX fuel in 1997. It did not start MOX fuel in 1997. It started MOX fuel in 2009. That's a 12-year delay. Why was that? Magic? No. Is it because plutonium fuel doesn't work? No. It was because of civil society. So that MOX fuel was imported for the Takahama reactor. It was supposed to start in 1999. And citizens groups had become aware that there might be some data falsification on the MOX fuel. And yes, I know, I don't want to embarrass my co-panelist, but she was with one of the groups. And the British company tried to cover this up. They said, we're not going to provide you computer files so that you can quickly examine it. We're going to give you pieces of paper, books of paper. So good luck analyzing that. And the citizen group said, okay, well, we need a lot of people. They got a lot of people. They invited up to work. You tell me if I get anything wrong here, but I think that's what happened. And they found out that the data from one batch of fuel was identical to the data from another batch of fuel, which is impossible unless you simply copy and paste rather than really inspecting the fuel. And they found this out, and they reported this, and then finally the British company admitted this, and the fuel was returned all the way back from Japan to the UK. That is not a simple enterprise. And the UK company paid $100 million fine. Okay? So now the second reactor that was supposed to go was the Kashiwazaki Kariwa 3 reactor. And again, citizens groups went to the small village of Kariwa, and they educated people, and they passed out information. They said, here's our concerns about this fuel. This fuel was made in Belgium, not in the UK, but they said we have concerns also about the quality of this fuel. And they had a referendum, and 54% of the population, of the voters, voted no to stop this sort of fuel. And then again, there was an effort at the Fukushima Daiichi reactor, which was going to be the third reactor. And again, the people turned the politicians against the use of MOX. And it's for this reason that the start of MOX fuel was delayed by 12 years and then interrupted later by Fukushima accident. And that's why so little plutonium has been used, and why one of the main reasons that the stockpile is so big. So, and I could go through this in Switzerland, I could go through this in Belgium, I could go through this in Germany. Germany was an extreme case. The protests were huge, tens of thousands of people. People lying on railroad tracks. One person actually was killed when he laid his body on a railroad track to stop a shipment of spent, I think it was spent fuel going through reprocessing. And Sean can correct me if I'm wrong. And this person was actually killed, and it's tragic, and it's horrible that that had to happen, but it was this sort of action that led Germany in 2002 to outlaw the export of spent fuel for reprocessing, for return of plutonium, and to decide to phase out nuclear energy. So citizens can do a lot. It takes a lot of work, and It doesn't always work the first time, but that's what democracy is all about.
Thank you very much.
シーンセクターで何ができるのかっていう話で一言話をしたいんですけど、さまざまな抗議行動を今アランさんが紹介してくれたような日本でもいろいろとやってきたわけですが、それに加えてまさに今日この原子力資料情報室と韓国の、IPC というグループと共同してこの企画をしたその大きな理由は、結局その韓半島における東北アジアにおけるこの非核化ということが、その日本の原子力政策、ひいては核燃料サイクルと非常に密接に関係しているんだということをもっとみんなが認識して、対応していくことかなというふうに思います。日本では原子力の軍事利用と平和利用が、平和利用かっこつきかと思いますが、なんか分けて考えられていて、どちらも反対しているんだけれども、その間のリンクということがあんまり意識されていないように思うんですね。やっぱり今後はその日本のプルトニウム利用、核燃料サイクルプルトニウム利用というのがその、核兵器と関連していて、そしてこの朝鮮半島の非核化ということに、それによって、日本のプルトニウム利用も最終的にはなくなるかもしれないみたいな、こういう意識を持つことが必要ではないかというふうに思います。
ありがとうございました。ではまだ質問いっぱいあると思うんですけども、この皆様パネラーのまとめのコメントに入りたいと思います。ですみません、タイムキーパーさんよろしくお願いします。通訳すみません、英語で言います。Okay, we would like to conclude with your comments, all of you, and please keep it within a minute and a half. And if you could especially keep in mind concretely, what should be done, and also how can civil society be involved. And I think there are many issues that we didn't get to discuss. One was spent MOX fuel, the promise of that. If anybody would like to comment on that and your final comment, that would be great also. So,
yeah, as already mentioned by her, actually the active environment is the key to make a solid national program. So I don't care actually whether you go for the reprocessing or stopping reprocessing at this moment. It's all your decision. But to make a good decision, you have to have a very open mind. And especially in this era, we have to consider the regional security because we have a lot of issues with China, Japan, Korea, among ourselves. So for that one, we have to have an open mind. Otherwise, we cannot go anywhere. So throughout our history in Northeast Asia, we experienced a lot of wars. So we should not repeat that kind of bad memory anymore. So in order to have a common prosperity for our future generation, open-minded approach with your own local citizen or with all of us in this region is the key for the real success. Thank you.
And to combine two of Eileen's points here, and Alan's, so the reason why the public in Japan, citizens groups oppose the use of MOX fuel is because MOX fuel actually increases the risk of a nuclear accident. And after Fukushima, it makes even less sense to do something that would make nuclear reactors even more dangerous. One aspect of using MOX that has not been examined is what happens to MOX fuel when it is used and then stored in the spent fuel pool. And for a number of reasons, spent MOX fuel is even more dangerous than spent uranium fuel in the spent fuel pool. And if there were a rapid loss of cooling water from the pool, the risk of a fire that would release a vast amount of cesium-137, which is the radioactive isotope that is responsible for the exclusion zone around Fukushima today. That would, the release of cesium-137 would be even more severe if there were spent NOx fuel in the pool. So the Nuclear Regulation Authority, to my knowledge, has not examined this issue. In fact, they did not revisit the safety of NOx fuel in the wake of Fukushima, and that is that's one way where citizens groups could definitely have an impact.
I don't have technical powers like Meg, but into the balance word. And this here, I mean, these days that in Northeast Asia, once we got have a wrong thinking that goes around to the kind of so-called security dilemma. Even if each country is trying to better off their security with the so-called nuclear weapons or whatever it means, that it take turns in all countries and then they go down to the worst situation. Yes, no, I understand the worries that China is already a nuclear state, weapon state. But at least at this time of change, first change, that South Korea, Japan try to get into North Korea to the, not the vicious cycle, but in a better situation to make the countries, especially citizens, combine all together to make a better world.
午前中のセッションで梅林さんが東北アジアの非核地帯条約あるいは非核地帯の創設ということに言及されて、確実にそういう方向に向かっているんだけどまだまだ時間がかかるというふうにおっしゃってました。でその方向に向かっていくと日本のその再処理プルトニウム利用っていうのが一つの大きなネックなり課題になってくるという話もあったと思います。逆に言えば日本が再処理プルトニウム利用政策を放棄する転換することによって東北アジアの非核地帯条約非核地帯の創設というんですか、それに大きく貢献できていくんではないかというふうに思います。でそういう観点から、引き続き再処理を止めるというふうな活動をやっぱり市民の皆さんの力を集めて、みんなで一緒になってというかそういう止める方向に進んでいければいいなというふうに考えています。どうもありがとうございました。
Okay, I'm going to make just one point, and it's an irony. The recycling of plutonium into fresh fuel, MOX fuel, was originally intended to save nuclear power. The idea was, as we talked about at the beginning today, that we were going to run out of uranium, and there were going to be so many nuclear power plants, and that the only way to save nuclear power was to recycle plutonium into fresh fuel. What has actually happened is very different, and that is, as I described, plutonium fuel use is actually undermining nuclear power. Okay? It's more expensive, it creates safety risks, it's less popular, and in some cases, people get so upset about the use of plutonium, they say, let's shut down nuclear power entirely, which is what happened in Germany. So, since plutonium, therefore, is not good for nuclear power, it's actually bad for nuclear power, in my opinion, regardless of whether you are pro-nuclear power or anti-nuclear power, you should be anti-plutonium.
Thank you very much. ではこのセッションがこれで 終わるんですけれども、でまとめに入っていきたいと思うんですけれども、最後にご発言された皆様、皆さんにお礼ありがとうございます。拍手でよろしくお願いします。皆様もお聞きになっている皆様もありがとうございました。では席を入れ替えてまとめに入っていきたいと思いますので、よろしくお願いします。
ご長官にも関わらず参加いただきまして誠にありがとうございました。主催団体を代表しまして厚く御礼申し上げます。本当にありがとうございました。パレステーションではですね、朝鮮半島の多角化をめぐる状況、病院になられる状況をですね、ご報告いただきました。そしてそれにもかかわらずですね、今、絶好の機会が訪れているということについてもですね、私たち、よく理解できたと思います。ではですね、私たちこの状況をですね、どのようにして、先ほど市民セクターがどうすればいいのかというお話だったと思うんですけれども、市民セクターがどうやってこの機運を高めていけばいいのでしょう。本日ですね、議論で明らかになったとおり、一番重要なポイントはやはり消防士のことであろうということだと思います。でその他の鍵になってくるのはですね、外務省からご参加いただきました鳥さんが、プルトニウム問題についてイメージ君もおっしゃられていたとおり、透明性の問題だと思います。透明性を図るために何が必要かといえばですね、やっぱり民主主義と民主主義市民社会の監視による透明性の確保、そして民主主義なのだと思います。その上でですね、プルトニウム問題というのはですね、一つ重要な問題になってくるのだと思います。その相互不信のですね、一つの種になっているのであるプルトニウム問題になってくるのだと思います。そのプルトニウムをですね、やはり私たちですね、きちんと監視していって、この量をですね、どのように解決していくのかというところをですね、市民社会できちんと議論していかなければいけないなと思います。で、第2セッションにおいてはですね、これまで資源の有効利用や、資源や使用済み燃料対策として行われてきていた使用済み燃料のですね、再処理と、分離プルトニウムの資源利用、これがですね、多くの国でやはり行き詰まってきたという現状、それにもかかわらず北東アジアでですね、いまだに進んでいる再処理の状況が議論されました。これまでですね、使用済み燃料再処理ですね、これは専門家が、ですね、一部のエリート階級の人たちがですね、ほぼ先見的にこの問題を進めてきたわけですけれども、結果として、膨大なコストを生み出して、計画が遅延している、でさらにはですね、処理量の計画に満たない状況で、証明上のですね、市民社会の反対に見つかっていないという現状が、あるわけです。でこの結果ですね、韓国でですね、使用済み燃料の規模を失って戦況額のコストをかけて、取り出したプルトニウムに関してもですね、ゴミとして処理される時代が、やってきました。これ日本でも例外ではないわけです。日本がですね、FCA 高速臨界実験施設というところでですね、あったプルトニウム331キロをアメリカに送り返したわけですけれども、このアメリカに送り返すにも当然お金を日本は払っていて、でその送り返したプルトニウムどうなるかということですね、結局はウィップにですね、処分されていくという結末を迎えるわけです。この行き詰まりですね、私たちってどうやって解決すればいいのでしょうか。パンさんのご報告にもあったとおりですね、ここでもやはりかけられているのは民主主義の問題になるんだと思います。韓国ではですね、使用済み燃料の総量は今確定している状況です。で、極めて日本でもですね、原発の進出がないという、前提条件に立って考えたらですね、仮に原発の従業員数があったにしても、総量というのも確定している状況なんだと思います。でこのような状況でですね、私たちは本当に再処理をこれするべきなのでしょうか。取り出してしまったプルトニウム、これコストに本当に見合うのでしょうか。ちゃんとですね、それを利用して原発をですね、運転していくことができるのでしょうか。排気物の体積やですね、有害度を低減すると言いますけれども、これがですね、使用済み燃料のライフサイクル全体を見た上で本当に減っていくのでしょうか。私たち今日報告いただいた通りですね、朝鮮半島の非核化を巡る状況が、解決の糸口が見えてきているという状況があると知りました。使用済み燃料の解決策がですね、再処理ではなく、分離プルトニウムの解決策の目視外になるということも、しています。こうした選択肢を含めてですね、平場で透明性のある形で議論できるような社会を作り出すこと、それこそがですね、この問題にかけられているという意味ではないかというふうに思います。本 本日のですね、シンポジウムにご登壇いただきましたゲストの皆様、誠にありがとうございました。また、コーディネートいただきましたですね、お二人の、司会いただきましたお二人の皆様にですね、本当に感謝申し上げます。また、会の進行にご協力いただきました、ご参加者の皆様も、厚くお願い申し上げます。また、とりわけですね、一番大変な仕事をしていただきました同一通訳に、お三方にですね、本当に感謝申し上げます。ここで、会場の皆様から感謝の拍手をいただければ。本日は誠にありがとうございました。お帰りの際は足元に気をつけてお帰りくださいませ。